I mean, mostly, I think this is I should start by saying that I felt like an intruder a lot of the time during this conference, because I have a background in art history and I know very little about technology and the digital in the end. But I've learned a lot, and I especially learned a lot about digital tools and infrastructures that could actually help us put in place ethical practices and methods of holding ourselves accountable. So I don't want this to be an abstract discourse about ethics. Nathalia and I were very clear about that while we were preparing for this roundtable. We do consider ethics as a practice and not a code of conduct or a means to an end. And that's why ethics also needs to be constantly renegotiated in relation to the subjects that we're engaging with and the materials that we're engaging with. And I think very key to our understanding of ethics was that we're all equally responsible as viewers and listeners in this practice.
Yeah, I can continue. Maybe we can, we separate some case studies. I know it's not the intention maybe to do another presentation, but I think it is maybe easier if we can share some examples to have more concrete things to discuss. But I think that would be interesting because you just finished your presentation, that we can continue about some ethic discussion that it's also related with this example, as maybe, I don't know, maybe we can open with one questions that we finished the notion of digital literacy. How do you think maybe this aspect could be applied in this example? How do you think that, considering both the audience of the Triennale and the event itself, how do you think that if we have more visual digital literacy in about this could happen in a different way? Maybe I'm just starting with a question to you, and that could open to another discussion.
Because I think also because I have a background in art history, I have a very clear position on that. I think it's shameful for the Triennale that it took so long for them to take down these videos, and especially, they asked Abunadara about their participation and invited them. Abunadara declined that invitation, and they nevertheless showed these images. So I don't think there is any way to defend that position. And even though it is in the public domain, they have artistic rights and also moral rights to not have their images repurposed for this narrative of the Triennale about Syrian refugees and migrants. Actually, I think I would quite like to turn this a very broad question to all of you. What kind of ethical concerns that you have encountered in your practices? I hope that this can be a space that in which we can learn from each other and sort of raise questions and concerns and insecurities. I am reproducing, so one of my insecurities, I'm reproducing these images here. I haven't asked for permission to do so. So that is very clearly also a violation of the right to the image. And perhaps while I'm posing this very broad question, Nathalia and I, we also collected some key terms for the discussion. I'm just going to skip through all of that. That might help us think about these questions.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. It was very interesting both. I'm an artist too, so I have an artistic background, not technological. I'm like you, so for me it was very interesting everything. But I thought about appropriation, my artist form appropriation. I think about that a lot, and I think that ethics. You say you have the artistic rights and the ethic rights. So the artistic rights, they are ruled by laws. each country has their own laws, so they are not the same all the world. And the ethics rights, each person has an ethics right, so there's not the same in each person. So that's the point. I think you can join it. It's very difficult. It's very difficult. You have to ask for the conscience of the people. I don't know if it's. I think you're right.
I think that's 100% true. And I also think questions of consent are not applicable anymore because they are differently ruled in every country. So, and I think this idea of ethics then is very related to literacy, right?
Yeah.
There's hands over there. Okay.
I found it really interesting when you were talking about ethics as, and maybe misunderstood, not necessarily a code of conduct, but like a performative act. And it made me think a lot about Amy Alexander's talk and talking about code as necessarily a performative template, right? That the code exists, but in order to enact the work, it must be performed, it must be run. And thinking a little bit about the platform that Dawn wrote and ways that we can attach desired usage for these digital objects. And in the way that there's different creative licenses, right? The kind of Creative Commons, or these like more standards that are moving more universally. And wondering if in the code itself, in the platform itself, that there is an ethical need to provide these types of preferences for people when they save an image, right? If I save a JPEG, I can talk about how I want it compressed and how I want, you know, the pixels to look, but maybe some really quick and easy ways that we can embed in the metadata so that like an image, if it is shown outside of context and without consent, that there might be recourse for the owner of that image. It gets also kind of complicated too when we start thinking about images of people and how the people who maybe are not steeped in digital media literacy or image literacy would feel about that. But especially on social media platforms, like, you know, I don't know what your total number was, 9 million or something images uploaded a day. These platforms know who's in the images, right? Like they know, they have facial recognition, they know. So I wonder if similarly, if I save an image, if I could embed, you know, metadata in that content, it is totally possible that I am notified that an image of me gets uploaded and how I like that image to be used, right? It's possible, but the problem is we don't really have great ethics boards inside Adobe or Facebook or, you know, Google tried, but I think, you know, the ethics group was dissolved within a month or something. And so how do we create our own platforms? Is that the way forward? Yeah. And I know you're not technologists, which is why I kind of gave that broad, but yeah.
I mean, if anyone wants to respond to the question from the audience as well, the thing is, I want to shift responsibility from image producers to image spectators. I would hope that by advancing literacy, both visual and archival literacy, we would not be forced to include all kinds of metadata in images in order to control how they are being reproduced and for what purposes. I mean, one case that I'm engaging with is YouTube in 2007 introduced an algorithm that's taking down all videos that are considered to have terrorist content, which also implies all kinds of videos that document war crimes and human rights violations in Syria. And they could have been used as evidence in legal cases. So there's an initiative called the Syrian Archive, who've also developed an algorithm that is automatically downloading everything that's uploaded to YouTube, because these algorithms they also can't be held accountable in the end, and it's humans behind these algorithms, right? So yeah.
So if I understand you right, you don't see the solution in automated. You don't believe in automated solutions for this, because there maybe is there a code of conduct necessary for the new media archives or archives in general? A code of conduct that we are really missing in the modern, that's related to the modern technological possibilities. Within the ISEA Archives, we sometimes have discussions about what we can do and what we cannot do with data that's available on the internet. I think like it's public domain, I can use this image as long as I mention the source, but that's, I cannot find the rules that I should stick to.
I'm skeptical about codes of conduct because they assume that there could be a rather standardized performance of how to deal with these images. Standardized.
Oh, standardized.
Sorry. And as we were saying before, it is very much specific to the context, the material, and the subjects that would redefine any ethical practice in relation to these images, I think. But I also saw that there was another comment in that question.
Yeah, can I just also add something, and which is also actually it's more a question about, I also, in a way, I agree that is, I think it is make more sense to give the responsibility to the spectator, but even what's the limit of this visual literacy, this digital literacy, and it is also very, it varies a lot depending on the context in which this spectator coming from. I don't see in many contexts in some Latin American countries, countries in which digital is not so widespread yet, how this literacy could finally be achieved. So, but how should we deal with this unbalancing also digital literacy and the limits of this? This is also, yeah, no response, but there's also.
Yeah, question.
Yeah, very quickly. No, it's yeah, remark. No, I hope it fits somehow. The thing is, if we very basically separate the technical level from the content somehow. I mean, on a technical level, of course, we can always copy an information. I mean, the digital and electronic media are born because the information can be copied. So we should take, I think, this into account when we think about whatever protocol. Of course, Creative Commons was a standard, very widely adopted, but as we know, you can't stop somebody to copy something and to use it. Then you have to act on a different level, which is the legal somehow, if you want to. And the source, I think it's a very key point. This should be the first, let's say, act in terms of respecting the source and pointing to the source all the time, because then I can verify the information and who has produced it in the first instance. And we all know that, especially on social media, the sources are disappearing because it takes just that little bit amount of time that most people don't have or don't care about, which is also a thing which I think it's very crucial to discuss. But I wanted to ask especially to the art historian this specific question, because on one side the framework was the other main thing that was, I think, that emerged. So what is the framework? And then we discuss, we judge, we act upon. And we have the museum, like the classic, the biggest framework on one side, and the street, let's say, passing of information through digital devices on the other. I was thinking, there's any case in art history, or I mean, there's any kind of organization, bottom-up organization like creating, let's say, their own popular cheap museum that would defend, let's say, or make it official, a collection of images or information that then is created and officialized outside the institutional framework.
I think that's more a question for you, Nathalia.
I don't know, we can start because maybe
Can I ask something?
Yeah, I think what's interesting, okay, what you are saying, that how we cannot also predict the use of something that we are archiving in the future, right? And because it could be used for several purposes, and I would say that even if we can be responsible of what we are archiving and to not use this in a different, unethical way, we cannot be guaranteed, because it is a very unconscious and also like this idea of counter collector, the people could became by chance a collector. They are not doing this on purpose, and also they are not doing something that is not ethical on purpose. So but I think that I also don't think that a code of this, it is possible to expect this from companies, from museums. I still think that it's individual, but at the point that we don't know, even also individual would change in the future, would be very, it cannot, I don't have an answer for this.
Yeah, we have the difference between the code and the law. I mean, the people that are willing will stick to the code, and the people that are not willing don't stick to the code, and then you have the law. It's somewhere in between that you have to look for solutions. But you can also make it an endless problem, and maybe it isn't a solvable problem.
I was worried that I would be sort of the party pooper at the end of the conference who addresses this endless problem.
No, can never be the party pooper at ISEA.
I think there is a fundamental difference between performing ethics and practicing ethics. And there are lots of museums who engage with, I would say, alibi gestures or whitewashing, for example, or greenwashing. And then, they follow a code, or, laws, they definitely, most of them follow laws as well. But that doesn't mean that their practice is ethical. And I know that Ricardo has a question.
Ricardo has a question, and there is a question there. Let's go to Ricardo. But
yes.
We have 5 minutes left.
Yes. I just want to be sure if I misunderstood something that was said, that digital is not widely spread in Latin America. That was the sentence I understood.
No, not digital. Well, at least the access to internet. More access to internet. At least in Brazil, it is still the big majority of people don't have access only on cell phones, and it's still. I don't have the number here, but it's not. It is still limited, although it is a very contradiction, because it's a very digital country, but it's still, like in the pandemic, this was much more clear, especially on education, that many students didn't have high-speed access to internet, and so there's still a gap in the access for many people.
But I think the sentence was more related to literacy, right?
But it's also, if you don't have access, the literacy also would be compromised, I think. Yeah.
If you allow me, just briefly, I think that in Latin America, yes, there are restrictions, but most people have access to internet through phones, as you were saying. But I work mostly in Canada, And in Canada, many of my students have problems to access to internet, even on their phones. So it's not just in Latin America, because given that sentence that in Latin America we have those kind of restrictions, it sounds like a little bit, even if you live in Brazil, it looks like the typical speech about colonialism and the central countries where everything related to media art is happening in certain places, and then other places are the poor places where we don't have access to this and that. I don't believe in that, to be honest. Thank you.
That's a good remark, Ricardo. We have a question here. Go ahead.
Okay,
Remark.
yeah, I love the presentation, and I was thinking again the role of the archive and the archivist, and it's not exactly to tell the stories, but to prepare the material to so that these stories can be told. So, archivists, we are working in a permanent contradiction, because we want to tell things or we see things, but our job consists in stay distant of these things all the time. And I was also thinking on the term, if I'm not wrong, in English they speak about custodians, the people working in the archive, and it's everything for me. It's kind of taking care of the objects, and here preservation have another role, and it's about this care. And I'm thinking this care cannot work without empathy. So you have to empathize with the objects, which can be somehow strange, but especially with the people that give these objects to the archive to preserve them. And somehow there is one idea, and it's the idea of conflict, and we have to face it somehow, because there will always be conflict between what some people want to do with some material, what some other people want to do about this material. And your case was kind of clear because the author was expressing their desires, but sometimes you don't have the author, you cannot reach, or you cannot be sure, you only have part of the group and so on. So I think sometimes you have to be referee or something like that in the middle, and I just hope that people do the best they can do. There is no criterion, but I think it's just kind of personal code or something like that. You cannot really put a line on there. Yeah. I want to say.
It's a point. I think it's more or less what I also, but you called it party poo-poo.
No,
No, it is a problem we need to discuss, that's clear, but the solution doesn't seem close by.
no, and I don't think maybe looking for a solution is the way to go, but being very sensitive about the questions and immediate responses that we feel towards archival material. I mean, I think archivists have several dimensions of responsibilities to the subjects inscribed in the records, to the producers of the material, and to the viewers, and that stretches from the past into the future, you know. So also one of the a question that I also had, that came up for me during the presentations was about for whom are we actually archiving? And how does the accessibility, how does the archival architecture that we build foreclose or encourage accessibility and participation in that? And so, because building an archive is already a way of defining who we are archiving for, right? So it's not, yeah, that wasn't really a question, sorry. But I mean, another term that, two things that also struck me was that content moderation seems to be an increasing question that comes up in many of the archival initiatives I've encountered today. And I'd be curious if anyone has any experiences with that, because GI was also talking about the Twitter archive from the 2020 election campaign in the US, and there must be, I mean, there must be a lot of violent content and hate speech in there, and I was wondering about content moderation in that, and then also the right to be forgotten. So how can we build this into our archival structures?
Good questions.
Excuse me, but perhaps also the question is there even a frontier now between an archive that is accessible and a diffusion platform? Because before it was, you know, two very different worlds, but suddenly, you know, there's no reason why you couldn't read archive.org differently than the web, and suddenly you could access everything. So yes, it raises all those questions.
Thank you. I find really interesting this reflection about how we are connected now, because mainly that's the point, and all the conflicts that can appear through this new point of view and this new reflection we can start to develop are really very nice. Thank you.
I'll conclude my remarks, my stories.
Thank you very much for your talks. It was really inspiring to see, let's say, two dimensions of the discussion about like digitality and archives. One, let's say, the first part we had kind of classification, tagging, for instance, right? Or in the AI classification and processing, you know, as well, the algorithm performing, you know, the selections in the art pieces of the archives there in Brazil. And in the second, it was more about circulation and exhibition, right? Like the conflict between something that is already circulating on the internet and how that is eventually, you know, selected to be displayed in an art context. And in both cases, I found very profound reflections in your presentations. What I would like to see in both cases is kind of more examples of the same kind of work or problems that you're addressing in terms of having like better comparisons. Let's say, for instance, I remember probably in ISEA 2010, there was a presentation about the early Arab Spring manifestations in Egypt. And at that time, it was because the internet was closed down very quickly. There were like just remains of audio. It was mainly, you know, short pieces of audio, and many questions like what you're addressing now were part of the discussion, and it's been hidden for a while. I'm so happy to see that, you know, this is coming back, and I think, you know, having more examples kind of will help to develop like a stronger framework. And also in your case, I think they probably connection to like what you're doing with the tags of the museum and with what Giselle and the team with Bruno is, right, are doing in Brazil. Sounds very promising, because in both cases I see there's a lot of room for elaboration. So I learned a lot. Thanks for the presentations, and I really enjoyed also the topics, you know, like I'd like to see like topics that we didn't touch that you have in the presentation, like care. Eventually that would be interesting to have, you know, or
Okay.
can we go back to the slides? No, right?
I think we can, but we're also running out of time.
There are a lot of really provocative words there. Thank you so much for that.
Amy still has her hand raised.
Oh, Amy, please.
Oh, I was just going to respond to the question about content moderation, which I think is an interesting problem for how history that we're living through will be archived. I ran into this at the beginning of the pandemic. My project I mentioned briefly, What the Robot Saw, used to run on YouTube because YouTube archives things like forever, seemingly, as far as we know. Everything on YouTube gets archived indefinitely. And so I was trying to make this archive that would stream back to YouTube and archive itself indefinitely of YouTube underseen videos. But once the pandemic hit, according to YouTube's explanation, their human content moderators went home and they implemented a rather aggressive content moderation algorithm. And so all of my videos suddenly, for that project, suddenly were getting removed by the content moderation algorithm, which made me realize, and there was a lot of discussion among YouTube content creators about this over-aggressive algorithm that had been implemented. So it occurred to me, I just moved my project to Twitch, which has better looser moderation, but it also doesn't archive. But I started to think about all of the materials that, the content that was being uploaded to YouTube during that period that would have been documenting that period of our existence, our collective existence, indefinitely. And these were, many things were going to be deleted. And so if we expand upon that, we can think about how all of these algorithms are not only impacting what we see now, but how history will be archived. So I don't know if other people have thoughts about that or agonize at night about that, but it's something that I've been concerned with.
Yeah, I think that also responds to Elian's consideration whether web platforms or archives themselves. And I think we need to realize that web-based archives that are sort of owned by private companies and corporations are actually very precarious and endangered, and that we can't rely on these materials being archived indefinitely.
Yes, I would agree with that, and it's better to have them than not to have them. But I absolutely agree that the Google-controlled archive is not a solution to begin with.
Thank you.
Yeah, can I just say something about what I think that is interesting. This makes influence between how social media are user archive and museum are incorporating some practice that are collaborative, that came from the hacker culture, which is this idea of maybe thinking about the relational ethics, how ethics could be created in a collective way. There are very interesting projects like what the Bruno and Gisele are doing, but also some indigenous people who are doing with museums new process of taxonomies, intervene in the archives names of how these images are categorized in the archives. So I think it's a very good strategy to use this relation to appropriate the influence of the collaborative in a good way from social media through museums, and apply like a relational ethics that, that's it.